We have all had painful events in our lives that can lead to depression, anxiety, addiction, or broken relationships. But here's a secret. It is not about what happened to us that causes suffering. It's the stories we believe about ourselves. Join us as we shine light on how to rewrite our stories, avoid the shadows of shame, and travel along the pathway to joy, love, and connection. It's the Finding Peace podcast with your host, Amazon best-selling author, Troy L. Love.
Hello, and welcome to the Finding Peace podcast. My name is Troy Love, and I'm so excited that you're here on our first podcast. I wanted to start out by telling one of my favorite stories. This is a true story. This story took place in Thailand. In 1801, the king of Thailand wanted to change the capital of his kingdom to the city of Bangkok. And as part of his visionary plan, he identified that he wanted to have Buddhist temples sprinkled throughout the city. As part of the Buddhist temples being built, he wanted to be able to use relics from old temples and bring them to the capital as part of an inauguration, as part of a celebration. And so he continued to do that until he died. And 20 years later, his grandson, King Rama III, continued to build on his grandfather's vision. So they brought various statues from around the kingdom and moved them to the capital, including a 9-foot Buddha statue made out of stucco and glass. And it remained there for about 100 years. As time progressed and as the city developed and things changed, the temple in which this 9-foot Buddha statue stood was eventually closed, and the building was no longer kept up, and it began to fall apart. There wasn't another temple big enough to house this statue, and they didn't know what to do with it, and so they moved it outside. They kind of shoved it in a corner into a tin shed that had hardly any protection from the elements. Rain, storms, sun, everything just kind of let this statue just hang out there with no protection. Now fast forward almost 100 years later, in 1954, a decision was made to build a new protective building for this statue. And so they decided to move this statue to its new resting place, a beautiful new temple where it would be housed. Unfortunately, the construction crew underestimated the weight of the statue. They didn't even understand why it was so heavy because, as far as they could tell, it was only stucco, mud, and glass. But suddenly and unexpectedly, as they lifted the statue up with a crane, the ropes snapped and the statue crashed to the floor. There was a scurry of anxiety and worry as they wanted to figure out what kind of damage may have been done to the statue. The workers scrambled to assess the situation, and what they discovered was a surprise. The stucco, the mud, and the glass had chipped, revealing solid gold underneath. Carefully, the workers removed the stucco and the glass, and they discovered that it was a 5-ton solid gold statue that is now on display in Thailand for visitors to go see. Historians suspect that about 200 years before that, the kingdom had fell under attack from invaders from a nearby country, and the monks watching over that temple wanted to protect the statue, especially from it being stolen by these invaders, and so they covered it up with clay and stucco and glass so that nobody would recognize the value of this statue. So when the invaders attacked the village and they left it in ruins, they left the statue behind because they didn't think it was worth anything. So I want you to consider this. This Buddhist statue was hidden under clay for 200 years. Nobody knew of its true value at all. Now there's another similar story. In 1464, a renowned sculptor named Agostino was hired to create a sculpture, an enormous, beautiful statue for the opera. A block of marble was provided from a quarry in a small town in northern Tuscany. Agostino began to work on this sculpture, this statue, but he only got as far as shaping the legs and the feet and the torso and roughing out some drapery. But then for some reason, nobody knows, he stopped working on the statue, and then he passed away. So another artist was commissioned to take off where Agostino left. His name is Antonio Rosaniello. He felt like he had made a mistake. He was chipping the statue, and he felt like this just wasn't going to work. And so for whatever reason, his contract was terminated, and this massive block of marble was shoved into a corner for 26 years. Similar to the Buddhist statue that had been left out in the elements, the same thing was happening with this gigantic marble that was just there. It was sitting in a yard in a cathedral workshop for 26 years. The owners of the Opera Authority, they didn't know what to do with it. It was a humongously huge piece of marble. Not only was it expensive, but it represented a large amount of labor, and it was really hard to transport. So they didn't want it to just be left in the marble yard in the cathedral workshop. They wanted to figure out what to do with it. They consulted many different artists around the country. They even had Leonardo da Vinci come and look at it. But nobody wanted to work on it. People had thought that this block of marble was not even worth doing anything with, and so it was going to just stay there. Until they hired a young 26-year-old named Michelangelo, who convinced the opera that he deserved the commission. And so he was given the official contract to undertake the challenging new task. And you may have heard this part of the story before, but Michelangelo says that as he looked at this block of marble, he could see the image of David in the marble. And he simply chipped away the marble a little bit at a time, until he was able to reveal the image that he saw underneath. Now consider these two stories. We have a Buddhist statue that was covered in mud, and we have this beautiful David statue that was covered in marble that many people had seen as not worth anything, had flaws and chips in it, and so it wasn't even worth the effort. It was just going to be left in a corner for centuries maybe, until somebody came along and was able to see its worth. How often do we do that to ourselves and the people around us? We fail to see our golden selves inside, the light and the beauty that we have inside, and sometimes we even cover it up with numbing behaviors, cover it up with food addiction, cover it up with other kinds of addictive behaviors. We get really busy doing all kinds of busy things, and we fail to see our own worth. We fail to see that we are people who have gifts and talents and ability to bring truth and light and joy to this world around us. We fail to see it. We cover it up ourselves in so many different ways. The way that the Buddhist monks and the way that Michelangelo were able to uncover the truth was a little bit at a time. They took it chip by chip, little mud at a time, a little bit here and a little bit there, and they removed the parts that were no longer serving the beauty inside. They removed that part, and so that the glorious image underneath could show up. We can do the same for ourselves. We can start to see that we have beauty and light and this enormous talent inside, and we can start to remove a little bit at a time the parts of ourselves that are no longer serving us, so that our glorious, beautiful core truths can be emerged. And that is really what this podcast is all about, to help you discover what your core truth is and to live by those core truths in a way that brings greater peace and joy and love for you and the people around you, to deepen connection. So join me next time as we start to learn what we can do to take apart these little pieces of marble, these little pieces of mud that are no longer serving us and can help us uncover our truth deep down inside.
You've been listening to the Finding Peace podcast. If we added value to your life, let us know or give us a rating. Before you go, subscribe to the show and get new episodes as soon as they are published. Thank you for spending part of your journey with us. And don't forget to grab your free copy of the Amazon best-selling book, The Art of Peace, by going to www.troylove.com. Copyright Finding Peace Consulting.